Hey guys, welcome back to the movie summary. Beginning of the movie, see a girl named Ruth. She kept looking at photos of her dead brothers. Just then her father comes there and says that even if your brothers are dead, they will always be in your thoughts. Ruth's father's name is Ted, and he is a famous writer. Next we see Marion, she is Ted's wife, she is very distressed. After a while Ted walks up to Marion. Ted told Marion that I had hired a boy named Eddie as my assistant for a summer job. And the boy also wants to be a good writer. Also says that we should be separated for a few days this summer. Hearing this, Marion feels strange. Marion does not answer his words. The next morning Marion goes to pick up Eddie. She tells Eddie that Ted's license expired 3 months ago. That's why I came to pick you up. Later she dropped Eddie near the house. Then he meets Ted. Later they talk to each other while walking. Eddie tells Ted that I also wrote stories, read my stories when you have time. Then Ted tells about his family. I want my wife to stay separately for a few days. I have also rented an apartment. He says that one night I will stay here and one night my wife, but you should stay here only. And you have to work in 2 places. Next we see Ted with a girl named Evelyn. He told the girl to take off her clothes. Ted is also a writer and illustrator. He paints nude paintings of beautiful girls. Evelyn leaves after finishing her painting. At night Marion goes to watch a movie. And Eddie goes to the same movie. Eddie watches Marion instead of watching the movie. Marion also understood this. After the movie ends, both of them talk outside together. Then he says I only eat burgers every day. Marion hears this and tells Eddie, let's go to dinner one day, where I will feed you good food. Eddie said okay to that. In the next scene, Eddie sees Marion's small clothes, and he does a hand job. That's when Marion comes there. Then both of them look at each other and get very embarrassed. After a while Marion calls Eddie and says that this is normal at your age, and she is happy that there is someone who thinks about her even now. After talking for a while, both of them left for dinner. Marion tells Eddie that Ted actually needed a driver, which is why he hired you. Eddie doesn't care much about this. They left after dinner. The next morning Marion tells Eddie about her dead sons. Then both become very emotional. Later Marion asks Eddie if he has spent private time with any girl. Eddie says he didn't. After hearing this she took off her clothes. Later they spent private time together. The next day Ted tells a story to everyone there. The story is called The Door in the Floor. Ted wrote this story. After hearing that story, everyone there applauded Ted. After leaving there, Eddie and Marion make out again. The next day Ted is sketching nude painting with Evelyn. That same night, Ruth wakes up. Then she goes into her mother's room. Eddie and Marion are having private time in the room. Seeing them, Ruth screams loudly. Then Marion said, "It's okay Ruth, don't worry," and sent her to her room. The next morning Ted and Eddie go by car. Actually, Ted knew what was going on between Eddie and Marion. He says to Eddie that Ruth saw while you and Marion making out, and you should be careful of her not seeing it, it's your fault. Hearing all this, Eddie was silent. Also Ted, when I apply to divers the topic of Ruth custody comes up, then you have to do me a favor, because I won't let Ruth see when I'm with another girl. Ted says that Marion very careless about her children. Next we see Eddie and Marion on bed. Eddie tells Marion, why didn't you leave Ted? Then Marion, I can't do that, because he understands me so well. She says he knows what I am doing. Ruth injured her hand when the photograph fell from her hand. As the wound worsened, Ruth needed stitches in her arm. The next day, Ted gives Evelyn's nude pictures to Eddie and tells Eddie give these paintings to Evelyn. Eddie then tells Ted that you promised to meet Evelyn today. To that Ted, I have no interest in going there. Later Eddie goes to Evelyn's house. Seeing Eddie, Evelyn gets angry and asks why Ted didn't come. Then Eddie didn't answer her properly. That made her angry. After arriving home, Eddie tells Ted that Evelyn is very angry. Hearing this, Ted takes Eddie and leaves for Evelyn's house. Along the way Ted said, I read your story, and he gave Eddie some feedback. After talking like that, they go to Evelyn's house. Evelyn angrily throws away all her sketches. Ted and Eddie are outside looking at her sketches. Then Ted tells Eddie he'll be back in 10 minutes and goes into the house. Then Eddie approaches Marion. Marion is ready to leave Ted today. She tells Eddie that you need to take Ruth to the doctor, and Ruth shouldn't know that I am going. On the other hand, Evelyn tries to kill Ted with a knife. Then Ted somehow escapes from her. Evelyn then gets into a car. Evelyn's worker tells Ted to run away. Ted immediately runs away. On the other hand, Eddie and Ruth go to the store to get the broken photo. But the manager says, I won't give you this photo. Then Eddie tells the whole situation to the manager and also tells the manager about the affair between him and Marion. Hearing all this, the manager gives the photo to Eddie. On the other hand, Ted is exhausted from running and walks into a bookstore. He met his fans there. Ted gets a lift from his fans and comes home. There was Marion sitting in the car ready to go somewhere. Ted approached Marion. Marion looks at Ted silently and goes away without saying anything to him. After a while, Eddie comes home with Ruth. Now Ted knows that Marion has left him forever. Ted angrily punches Eddie. Marion takes all the photos of her 2 dead sons. This infuriates Ted even more. Next we see Ruth with Alice. Alice gets angry because of Ruth. Then she cries and says that Ruth doesn't like me, so it's a waste of me being here, and I'm leaving this job. That night, Ted shows Marion's sketches to Eddie. He also explained how his 2 sons died in an accident. One night I was in a car with my family. Marion and I were sitting in the back seat, and my 2 sons were in the front seat. Then a truck accidented our car. My 2 sons died due to this. Marion has changed completely since that accident. In the next scene we see Evelyn worker near Ted's house. He tells Ted that Evelyn fired me because I helped you, and now I need a job. At this point Ted asked to be Ruth's guardian. Even Eddie's summer job is over. With that he also leaves from there. Next we see Ted on the squash court. He suffers from loneliness. Then he opens the floor door and leaves. This is how the movie ends.